In our final edition this week, the US-Venezuela crisis is so intensely layered and complex that, of course, no single political party in our government of national unity can see eye to eye on how best to react to it. We check the GNU's foreign policy pulse with global correspondent Phillip de Wet.
You can argue that it puts South Africa in a somewhat stronger diplomatic position by showing the kind of backbone that's been notably lacking from other countries in Europe, for instance, in terms of response. You can accuse South Africa of hypocrisy for taking this approach to Venezuela when it didn't with Ukraine.
And political analyst Mphumelelo Mkhabela next.
There's no other platform where they can try to convince the presidency or DECO about their own views. So everyone end up speaking the way they like. So you end up not having a coherent policy stance from the center, from the presidency, that has been canvassed with everybody else. So South Africa must first of all sort out that issue as a structural coordination issue that should be done at the level of the presidency.
Later, at the end of the show, the ANC is founded on this day in South African history.
To know when the next episode drops, hit the like, follow, and subscribe buttons on our YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcast channels.
Before which we've got the Lead's new daily segment, Rauby's Pointless Braai Quiz. And today's question is this: what's the full official title for Venezuela? I'll give you the answer at the end of the show after On This Day in South African History. Get it right and you score absolutely nothing except the quiet satisfaction of sounding very informed around the braai. Sound good? No Googling. My name's Graeme Robenheimer. This is The Lead, and this is the South African story. Moving to our top story today and welcoming to The Lead, we've got global news correspondent Phillip de Wet as well as esteemed local political analyst Mphumelelo Mkhabela on the line with us now. Happy to have you on, gentlemen. Let's begin here. Can we all just take a brief moment first to recognize how crazy the world can get? The US has definitely intervened imperialistically before Panama, Philippines, late 80s, 90s. But to have a US administration as Trump so brazen in 2026 to abduct another sitting head of state, and then announcing that it'll be seizing and selling Venezuela's oil. I mean, it's nothing short of mind-boggling. Phillip, what do you make of it?
Look, when it initially happened, it seemed like a very big deal. And then if you start looking at it in the broader context, it makes perfect sense, right? So what we had most recently, just a short while ago, the United States withdrew from a bunch of multilateral organizations, including the UN's Peacebuilding Fund and the Peacebuilding Commission, a country that renamed its Department of Defense to the Department of War. So the US has long told us that it does not think defense is important, but that it wants to, under Donald Trump, take on a warlike kind of position. And that's exactly what it did here. Likewise, when Donald Trump now talks about taking control of Venezuela's oil, selling that oil, controlling the money, and using that money to buy American goods, that's exactly what they were talking about in the Ukraine. And so in that case, the US was saying, we're going to take control of Ukraine's mineral wealth, we're going to control that money, and this is how we're going to build peace. So, on the one hand, this is an amazing kind of like wildly illegal step for the US to take. On the other hand, it's exactly what it's been telegraphing all the way through.
Let's bring you in now, Mphumelelo. Your views here. It's a crazy moment, not necessarily unprecedented, but is definitely eliciting a global response that we just don't see every day. Your view?
Yeah, indeed, Graeme. Things are changing, and America has always acted, as you said, unilaterally before, but this is a new form of unilateralism, the one where there's no pretense. You don't go to the UN Security Council and propose a resolution to deal with terrorism or narcotic drug dealers in South America. You don't do that. You just go straight in and kidnap a head of state and accuse him of being part of of being a ringleader of drug dealers selling drugs to Americans. And then that's the legitimacy you use to kidnap him and try him in an American court, not in an international criminal court. You see, this we saw this. I mean, also when Trump in his first administration withdrew a multilateral deal that Europe and America had entered into during Obama's time with Iran on nuclear. Trump withdrew that and cancelled that. And in this second administration, he then attacked Iran, accusing Iran of enriching uranium to proliferate nuclear. So he doesn't believe in acting within even multilateral institutions. He believes in acting alone as America. And he has actually done so even at the expense of American strong allies. We know he has now isolated Canada. He's isolated a lot of Europeans. He's basically weakened NATO as a consequence of all of that. Now, European leaders are now having to ramp up their defense spending to basically look after themselves, because America said, listen, you're on your own, we're also on our own. So it's a new world, a crazy world, and I expect a lot of anarchy, which is what multilateral institutions were supposed to avoid.
Yeah, absolutely. Trump is even now demanding, as we speak, that Venezuela's government, now under the current, chairpersonship of the deputy president, to block out Russia, to block out China. I mean, it's essentially the hijacking of an entire state and U.S. intervention that may last many, many years now, because at the base of it, the U.S. wants Venezuela's oil output, and that oil output has not been as great in the last 2 to 3 decades as what it could be. And that's the argument from the U.S. Philip?
How very dare you suggest that this is about oil? That's an outrageous lie. It's all about drugs, wasn't it? Oh, yes, it was about drugs. And then it was about a DEA operation, so it was law enforcement operation. Oh, and also, by the way, now we kind of have to rebuild the country. So it's also about the stolen oil. And, I make light of it, but we're used to, certainly from the US and from virtually every other serious government in the world ever, we're used to having a line of argument at least, kind of like a single message. What we've had from the US is we had its 3 top leaders in this case stand up and tell wildly different stories, vacillating between, well, it was about drugs. No, it's about the stolen oil. No, it's about bringing peace to Venezuela. And the US has such disregard for the rest of the world and such disregard for multilateral organizations that it doesn't even take the trouble to get its story straight first. It doesn't bother to lie. It doesn't even bother to come up with a plausible sounding argument. It basically does what it wants to do and then retrofits and goes, oh, yeah, it was about this, that, and the other. On the one hand, that's a terrible thing in terms of global diplomacy. On the other hand, it also seems to be quite effective, because how do you respond to that? What do you say to that kind of irrationality and complete disregard?
Yeah. And yes, it's Pretoria, of course, quite precariously. And let's first talk about the trade agreements that have already been in place between South Africa and Venezuela. It's nothing like massively to write home about. Yes, we've had agreements in the past that spoke directly to energy, but the trade flows, exports and imports between South Africa and Venezuela are nothing that big in the bigger scheme of things. Some would argue that the US as a trade partner is far more important. Mphumelelo, we're sitting with a very difficult situation from a diplomatic point of view. We have a GNU that's very uneasy with who gets to sing from the hymn sheet, and you've got very unhappy bedfellows in that GNU that are not happy with the way that the ANC's responded to all of this. But the ANC, from a historical point, and this is my question, have always had strong ties to Venezuela, and that strong tie speaks to anti-imperialism, right?
Yeah, indeed. I mean, the ANC always had strong ties with Venezuela, but more strikingly so with Cuba. Cuba has always been the strongest, most well-known ally of the ANC, and is the country alongside Libya that Nelson Mandela spoke about openly on American soil after he was released, where he defended the ANC's continued alliance with these countries as countries that supported the ANC's liberation struggle. Venezuela was not prominent in that list, but it belongs in that a category of left-wing countries, very sympathetic, very much part of the so-called Global South, Solidarity South, non-aligned movement, and those countries that would, broadly speaking, be aligned with the ANC. So it's not surprising that you would, in the GNU now, which consists of parties like Freedom Front Plus and the DA, there will be a difference of approach or opinion on how to react to what has happened. There isn't much economic relations, you correctly, between Venezuela and South Africa. There is trade, but it's not significant. What is significant is the trade between South Africa and the US.
Yeah.
And that's the trade that South Africa wants to defend and even expand. It's not just trade, it's investment relations. So many South African companies are invested in the US. So much American companies are also in South Africa. And there's always this, Trump wants South African companies to invest in the US. That's why he's imposing tariffs. He wants to expand the production base of the American economy. But we also want American companies to come here. Indeed, many of them are here. So South Africa must react, in my view, the best response would be react in a way that you safeguard your economic interest primarily, because that actually what gives you economic power. Every country has got what we call national power. In the main, it's derived from economic power. Economic power is about trade and investment relations and building up your wealth base as a country and getting your people employed. And out of that, you can be able to spend on security, strengthening yourself. You can be able to show up your national cohesion. All of those things are the basis of power. So when you speak in the world, your authority is a little bit more noticeable and much more impactful than when you speak when your economic base is weaker and vulnerable to be attacked anytime.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about Pretoria's initial diplomatic response to Washington's actions. It's been fairly predictable. It's condemned the U.S. abduction of Maduro and then called on the UN Security Council to take further action against the U.S. South Africa believes the U.S. broke the UN Charter. This was all fairly predictable stuff, right, Philip?
But interesting to contrast with the reaction to Ukraine as the DA did. Look, when Russia launched its full-scale invasion of Ukraine, South Africa also said this is a violation of the UN Charter. It also said that it should resolve this. But there was very much this line about the belligerent state needing to be accommodated. So it took at face value Russia's argument that it needed to preemptively invade Ukraine for security purposes, which was a very, very thin argument. We have seen nothing of the like in terms of Venezuela. When South Africa spoke at the UN, for instance, about Venezuela, it said, this is an illegal action. There is, this is a might makes right kind of situation. This must be reserved. And it gave no time whatsoever to America's admittedly also quite thin justification that this is about drugs and about stolen oil. And, this is notable, and it has been noted on the international stage. Not only the Americans, but others have taken note of this. You can argue that it puts South Africa in a somewhat stronger diplomatic position by showing the kind of backbone that's been notably lacking from other countries in Europe, for instance, in terms of response. You can accuse South Africa of hypocrisy for taking this approach to Venezuela when it didn't with Ukraine, but it is kind of getting lost in the noise. So I think that discrepancy is more important within South Africa and within the GNU than it is on the global stage.
Well, let's chat about that. Mphumelelo, we'll bring you in here as a political analyst. The DA is the uneasy bedfellow here, and we've seen it lots of times already before. We knew that when the GNU was formed. I still said, I turned to my editors and I went, foreign policy is always going to be the very uneasy policy front for the different parties within the GNU. And of course, the DA, as Philip has rightfully alluded to, feels that the ANC is hypocritical Geopolitical here because Pretoria did not take the same action against Russia when it invaded Ukraine as now with the Venezuelan example. But of course, we also have to take the context now that U.S. relations with South Africa have never been this bad before throughout the scope of history and time. And then you've got the Freedom Front Plus, who believes that it's for Maduro's removal, saying it's benefiting the people of Venezuela. And of course, we can't ignore, given how complex this all is, that there is this sort of movement or groundswell within Venezuela that people are happy that they've seen the back of Maduro, who has a dismal track record with in terms of human rights in Venezuela and has been seen as a dictator, despot for the longest time. Your views on how the GNU can try and grapple through with this? It's yet another challenge.
Yeah, Graeme, it will be very hard to find any political party that is very consistent on foreign policy. As an example, find me a party that condemns Russia's invasion of Ukraine and also condemns Israel's actions in Gaza and also condemns Trump's kidnapping of Maduro. And they've done that consistently. You wouldn't find it. So if you find a party that condemns Russia's invasion of Ukraine, they may not be condemning Israel's action in Gaza, but they may not condemn Trump's kidnapping of Maduro and vice versa. So it's difficult to find a party that will be consistent throughout. And that's the difficulty of foreign policy. And that's why it's hard for the public to actually follow and believe in some instances what or lend credibility to what political parties say. Much of what they say is informed by their own predisposition, their own prejudices, their own histories, their own background, not what actually objectively is on the ground. Because if we object an invasion or we object a criminality perpetrated by one country in another jurisdiction, the condemnation should be consistent throughout. You should condemn Russia's invasion of Ukraine. You condemn Israel's action in Gaza. You condemn Trump's kidnapping of Maduro.
Excellently put. It's clear as mud. We're never going to get a final sort of answer here that's going to speak to all parties unilaterally. Phillip, I wanted to bring you in here. I mean, oftentimes we're forgetting throughout the saga that the track record that follows Maduro and the Maduro regime, I mean, a lot of Venezuelans are happy to see him gone. That doesn't give an excuse for a superpower to come along and abduct somebody. But yeah, he wasn't really doing himself any favors if we just put the drug charges and the drug conspiracy aside for 1 minute.
Nicolas Maduro had to go. He was a bad actor, making certainly his region and arguably the world a much more unstable place, and he needed to go. And, many would argue that the mechanism by which he was made to go is not that important. However, what we have seen every single time is that external intervention in this kind of situation makes things worse. And we can point to any number of failed states, and you can look at Afghanistan, you can look at Libya. It has never really worked. What has worked is peace building, the long, slow, expensive, politically hard task of helping countries like that towards true democracy, helping them rebuild their institutions, kind of like supporting governments in exile even and negotiating transitions. That can lead to sustainable democracies that can contribute to the world in a positive fashion. Going in and partially decapitating a government by kind of like teleporting out the president, it doesn't seem like that is going to work. You cause, massive instability in the moment. Other bad actors can kind of like come into that vacuum. And it's very hard to stand here and to say, oh, yes, 4 or 5 years from now, Venezuela will be a paradise. It doesn't seem very likely. So I don't think we can accept any American argument that it was doing this for the good of Venezuela. There are many things it could have done that would have helped Venezuela and the Venezuelan people. This is not one of them. So you then have to, dismiss all of that and look at the kind of much more pragmatic and I would even say selfish approach that America has adopted now. which means the rest of the world needs to look at America as that kind of player. So when we start talking about Greenland, when we start talking about peace settlements in Ukraine, you have to say, how is the US going to extract the maximum value for itself at the minimum expense? And how do we deal with that kind of transactional superpower?
Yeah. Let's end off here, gentlemen. I'm going to give you both an opportunity now to sort of state what you think the GNU as it currently stands as this national coalition should be responding to an incident like this. If the ANC didn't have a stranglehold over foreign policy as we know it, rightfully so, Pretoria came out and said, look, this has all violated international law. But it hasn't also necessarily spoken out against the Maduro legacy of or a lack of governance in that particular country for the longest time. It stands with Venezuela and it stands with Maduro from a global south perspective. So it's not helping itself there when it comes to the US situation and the souring of relations in the discussion of bettering trade. And it sits with a difficult situation because it wants to better that trade and it wants a trade deal in the absence of tariffs that continue to hurt us globally. Although, at the same time, the Rand appears to be doing really well. But I'm going to give you both the final word at this stage. Mphumelelo, how should, in a different world where the ANC doesn't have a stranglehold on foreign policy, how should the GNU have responded to the Venezuelan situation?
Graeme, this is not just about the Maduro situation now. The coalition government, the government of national unity, should have long time ago sat down and had a discussion about what should be its foreign policy, given the fact that all of these parties come from different backgrounds and all of them have got different postures in their manifestos on foreign policy. So that didn't happen. And Ramaphosa had a meeting with the leaders of these political parties last year after a whole lot of tension around the budget and all of that, and threats to pull out. And they had all this nice meeting last year with Ramaphosa. But this discussion didn't take place. It was postponed. As a result, South Africa's foreign policy posture is presented by the president, the presidency, and DECO. So those two are the ones who speak on behalf of all of us. So what happens as a result is that the other parties in the GNU that are not part of the ECO, they're not part of the presidency, they feel like they have to say their own things, the way they see things, because there's no other platform where they can try to convince the presidency or the ECO about their own views. So everyone end up speaking the way they like. So you end up not having a coherent policy stance from the center, from the presidency, that has been canvassed with everybody else. So South Africa must first of all sort out that issue as a structural coordination issue that should be done at the level of the presidency, working with all the parties. Then, flowing from that, we will then know how does the GNU respond to each instance. They will develop a procedure. Something happens in Cuba, something happens in Venezuela, something happens in Iran or wherever. Then they will find a way, how do we coordinate the response and issue something that presents South Africa as a whole, not a component of South Africa. So I think the issue should be structural, and therefore it will come to the particular instances. And then we may have at least some reasonable level of consistency. Not necessarily 100% agreement, but at least some reasonable level of consistency and some consensus of sort.
I think the UN as a blueprint is already there for us to relook at how we respond with regards to foreign relations. I think it's an easy sort of avenue to look at, especially if you look at historically South Africans helped build the UN. Phillip, your response? What do you think Pretoria should have done with regards to Venezuela? Do you agree with Mphumelelo's view here that the GNU should actually sit down and come up with a better sort of strategy here? The ANC speaking for South Africa, not the GNU at the moment.
I don't think that it really matters, to be honest with you. I don't think the rest of the world really cares what the GNU has to say or what an opposition party in the GNU has to say. The rest of the world cares about the words that come out of the mouth of President Cyril Ramaphosa. He is the head of state. He is the one who, from their point of view, makes all of the important external decisions. So it is about the statement that he makes, and that is what is labeled as South Africa's position. The rest of the infighting and the noise, kind of like falls by the wayside. That's not really of interest. And then it becomes very simple. The president can strategically, tactically, morally, ethically, all he can really do is to denounce the American action, being as wildly illegal as it is, while also hopefully bringing in the context of saying Nicolas Maduro was, the kind of leader who had to go, and Venezuela was. So he needs to, the president needs to simultaneously say Maduro was a bad guy and America is acting like the bad guy at the moment. And yes, it didn't do that with Ukraine, and yes, it doesn't do that in every instance. It's never too late to start doing the right thing. So I can't see any benefit at all to South Africa not coming out and being very blunt about what America has done, being very blunt about the state in which Maduro has left Venezuela at the same time. Any other approach just kind of like erodes South Africa's moral authority, and that is one of its most important assets on the world stage.
They're both columnists for News 24. One Global News, that's Phillip de Wet, the voice you just heard, as well as Mphumelelo Mkhabela, a well-known political analyst here, both penning several articles for News 24 over the last couple of years, and you'll see their bylines still in 2026. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining us on the lead on News 24. It's very evident as we end off, there are just no easy answers here, and two things can be true at once. But in this case, 100 things could be true simultaneously. Bye, Donkey. Have a good 2026, and let's hope the crises can sort of stem for now and not be so hectic. I'm looking forward to a more chilled year, says the guy who's getting ready for elections.
Thanks, Graeme. It was a lot of fun as always.
Thanks, Phillip.
Yes, thanks, Graeme.
Cheers, Mphumelelo. Have a good one. Cheers, guys.
And finally,
ending off with On This Day in South African History, that's the 8th of January 1912. On this very day, the South African Native National Congress, as it was known at the time, the SANNC, was founded, an organization that would of course become later known as the African National Congress, the ANC. Now, at its inaugural conference, Reverend John Langalibalele Dube was elected as the organization's first president in absentia. The SANNC emerged in response to widespread racial exclusion and discrimination following the formation of the Union of South Africa. Still, early SANNC membership was at the time limited by class, gender and tribal considerations. Despite these contradictions, it grew and gradually broadened its inclusivity, with the SANNC renamed the African National Congress in 1923. Now, following the Sharpeville massacre in 1960 and the declaration of a state of emergency, the apartheid government banned both the ANC and the Pan-Africanist Congress, the PAC, of course, under the Unlawful Organizations Act on 8th of April 1960. Forced into exile, the ANC continued to expand its support both domestically and internationally throughout the 60s and 70s. By the 8th of January 72, it marked the anniversary of its founding. The ANC issued its very first public statement since going into exile, outlining its program for that year. Now, this practice was repeated in 79 and subsequently became an annual tradition known as the January 8th Statement. It remains significant in the ANC's political calendar until this day, which, of course, now the ANC celebrates its 114th birthday. Time now for the answer to Rauby's pointless Braai quiz. What is the official full title of Venezuela? And the answer is the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela. It's a name that was only adopted in 1999 as per their constitution. It's in honor of their national hero, Simón Bolívar, making it a federal constitutional republic, as well as with a decentralized government. Well, the more you know. What do you get if you got this right? Absolutely zilch, nada, nothing. But maybe you can enjoy the quiet satisfaction of sounding very informed around the Braai, the next one you hold one in January 2026. Thanks so much for choosing The Lead as your choice news podcast over the holidays. The show is firmly climbing the Apple charts and we're about to hit 1 million listens. Remember, if you'd like to get in touch with us, thelead@24.com is your best bet. You can also drop us comments below. We respond to all of those. Hit like, follow, and subscribe on all our various platforms, Spotify, Apple, YouTube. That way you'll be best notified of when our editions drop. But that's happening Monday to Thursday at 7 p.m. like clockwork. Until then, have a fantastic weekend. I'll see you on the other side of Monday. My name's Graeme, and so long as there's trusted news first, we'll have the lead.